computer. All right, and I can just send you the file afterwards. Let me pull back
Awesome,
up.
sir.
Let me pull up your questions.
Yep.
So you started out, you wanted a little bit of my background. I'll give you
Yeah, just to kind of
yeah, I'll give you
put
a
in.
highlight. Yeah. Um, grew up in Baltimore, always interested in fire and EMS. Had a scanner, actually, before I had a scanner, had a tunable radio at 13. Always interested in news and radio and TV. And starting at 17, I started working in radio and never thought I'd be a TV news guy, but thought I would do something in the production end. But uh, it evolved into that. I became a volunteer firefighter while working at a radio station in Southern Maryland, and I became a volunteer in Prince George's County in 1974. Did that for about 6 years. Was in their first medic class, their cardiac rescue technician class, and I think it was 77, and was a dispatcher for the county for about 3 or 4 years, and while still working in radio. Uh, did traffic reports on the radio, which evolved into a job at WTOP Radio, the all news station, and then did TV for 25 years after it took a buyout in 2010. Um, all of this in Washington, and since then I've gone back to my roots in the fire service a little bit with working with fire service organizations. 14 years as a contractor for the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and a number of years prior to that doing some volunteer work. More recently, I've had this firm with my partner Ron Sarnicki, who's a former fire chief, and Ed Klima, big in emergency management. Our firm is called Event C2, and we have a big contract with the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Actually, we've had done various contracts with them, and that's what I run mostly. And this new adventure called PIO Academy with my friends Mark Brady and Pete Perringer, two of the top public safety, public information officers in the country. And my wife is involved in that too, helping on the on-camera parts of it and training people how to be on camera. Her name is Hillary Howard, and that's kind of where we are. We live in Virginia. Um, what led me to establish Statter 911 Communications is started with the website. My last 3 years in TV, the TV station was getting into the web in a bigger way, and our first webmaster said every time we run one of your fire stories, we get a lot of hits, and we should do something with that. And I knew the reason why is because my friends at firehouse.com used to like my fire stories, and they would run it, and it would get a lot of firefighters involved. So he was the one that kind of created the idea to start a blog or a website called, and one of my coworkers came up with the name Statter 911, or maybe I came up with Statter 911, and she said, do STAT in capital letters. So um, that's that's how that evolved. And when I left TV, retired from my broadcasting career of 38 years, I created Statter 911 Communications to do a variety of contract work. As I said, helping with others tell their story through videos, through social media, and the like. And I've had a number of clients, including unions, um, uh, the IFC I mentioned, the Congressional Fire Service Institute I've worked with for a number of years, done just a variety of stuff. It's been a lot of fun, and do some teaching. Um, have taught for the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, I think for about a dozen years, and others. I don't do as much around the country because I have some limitations with my back, and it makes it a little difficult. But that's kind of what I've done and why we do it. Uh, I would say, I didn't quite transition into broadcasting for the firefighter. They went kind of hand in hand. I started out as my last year of high school working at a public radio station in Baltimore, and I rode along with the Baltimore City Fire Department for about a month, and s- supposedly working on stories, which I did a little bit, but I was just very interested in the fire service, and ran with one of their busy companies, and learned a lot about the fire service. Something else I learned about, uh, the, where they assigned me was with a battalion chief who later became the fire chief, named Peter O'Connor. His son Kevin O'Connor has worked with the IFF and other agencies for a long time. His son was a firefighter in Baltimore County, but Peter was at that time the head of the officers union, And the wagon driver with the shift that I rode along with was the head of the firefighters union in Baltimore. And just sitting around listening to them talk at 17 years of age taught me a lot about unions. And I, eventually evolved in my career in broadcasting as a shop steward for our union and on the executive board for our local. So, it's one of those things that it all went hand in hand. I was doing both at the same time, a little bit. And it's kind of neat for me after all this time in broadcasting to go back into it with the fire service in 2010, even if not being active in it, but to work with really some of the same people I volunteered with, 40 years earlier, 35, 40 years earlier. Does that make sense so far?
Yep. Yeah. I think we're doing real well. They kind of giving you a background here. And
all right, let me just take a drink of
what
water.
created
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So handling crisis communications, it's really interesting. It's stuff I learned, and I tell people when I teach today, I don't teach them about what my time in the fire service for the most part, except if there's some historical perspective to bring up. I don't tell my war stories there. They've got plenty of better war stories. I only really spent 6 years doing that. I tell them when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm really relying on two things. One, my time as a reporter and what I learned doing that, and my time watching closely with Statter 911 what's being done around the country. And I realized there's got to be a better way to do these things because I've seen so many people make the same mistakes. And one time, and I do this in my class, and I can send you a couple slides from it. And I think it was 1997, and this is really what got me, and I'm sure I've thought about it before, but it's one that really got me thinking. There was an anthrax incident in 1997 in Washington, D.C., and not the one in 2001 after 9/11. This was a scare at B'nai B'rith, the Jewish headquarters, Jewish community, Jewish organization headquarters, right on Embassy Row, Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, in Northwest. Happened in the afternoon. I was headed to another story, and I see fire and EMS stopped by Scott Circle, I guess it was, on Massachusetts Avenue. I said, so I stopped for a minute to see what was going on. And a guy who later became Fire Chief Donnie Edwards was a battalion chief. He said, Dave, I'm going to have to move you back, but here's what's going on. We've got a Petri dish. Is it Petri or Petri? I never get that right. Anyway.
Petri.
Yeah, I got it right.
I've always got it.
But says is anthrax and a threatening note to B'nai B'rith in a package. And we're going to shut down this whole area. So we took up a position on the other side of the circle where we could see everything. And for about 3-4 hours, I guess it was, they shut down a good portion of Northwest Washington. Scared the hell out of people. We knew what they were dealing with, supposedly, anthrax. It turned out not to be. Spoiler alert. But they didn't talk to anybody. Other than what I got from Donnie Edwards and maybe some people got from some sources, there was no press conference. There was no expert talking about what this is all about. They were somewhat unprepared themselves. They were deconning people right out in the open there. They didn't have a tent with even sides on it, including a good friend of mine who was a cop. I got video of him in his underwear. What did you want to ask something, Rob?
No, I'm just surprised. It just,
yeah,
surprised in some ways and not surprised in others.
Yeah, and this is the nation's capital. So they don't talk to us, but luckily, I'm live on the air for all the afternoon rush hour, basically, and all our newscasts at multiple times. And at least I had some background in understanding how they handled hazmat situations and a little bit on, some of the other stuff that was necessary. So I could describe what was going on, but we had, other than us working our sources, which is really important in Washington because nobody likes to talk on the record, nobody was going to talk. So what made it worse is we're off the air after our 6 o'clock news, and a little after 7 o'clock, I get a call, and so does another reporter friend of mine, one of my mentors. We both get calls that it's already been up and tested at Walter Reed, and this was not anthrax. So we both call our sources who confirm it, but I called the PIO for the police department. He says, yeah, you're correct, but can you hold on? Don't do it, because we're going to have a press conference in about an hour to 90 minutes, and we'll tell everybody then. We'll have the mayor there. We'll have the police chief there, the fire chief, people from Walter Reed and every other organization that's involved, FBI. And I said, you mean you panicked everybody for 4 or 5 hours? And now that you know that it's not anthrax, you're going to
Oh boy.
withhold that information and asking us to withhold it. I said, I'm going to talk to my boss, but I have a feeling the answer is going to be no. And, the
Oh
guy
no.
still, yeah, oh well. And of course, I went to my boss and the other guy did too. We all said, no, we're going on the air with it. We're not holding it. We panicked these people. Let's get the truth out. So, that really got me to thinking how they handled that whole event. What I didn't know at the time, till many years later, until probably after 2010, 13 years later, and I'd seen many other incidents since then. I was at 9/11 from the start at the Pentagon. Within 4 minutes, I was there, uh, and many other big incidents, and covered the later real anthrax issues um, when people died. It wasn't until sometime after 2010 when I started focusing on my classes that I learned that the U.S. Fire Administration had done a paper on the response in 1997.
Huh.
And I read that paper. I'll send you the quotes from it. You probably find it online somewhere. I might have it, but I have a couple quotes from it, and it talks about how important public information is, if nothing else, to keep people calm, to put it
Yeah.
all in perspective, to have an expert available to explain what is going on. And it basically talked how the media was ignored through this, and it was the wrong way to do it. Very ahead of its time in many ways. And I'm not exactly sure who wrote that paper. I need to go back and look and see if it's people I now know, because I've done a lot of work up in Emmitsburg and gotten to know a lot of those people. So that kind of was an eye opener for me that I'm on the right track. And I started kind of blazing my own path when people asked me to start teaching about it. I think one of the first one was in the Boston area. One of the people that followed my website asked me to do this. And yeah, I went up. I didn't even know how to do a PowerPoint at that point. It was like 2010, 2011. And then it kind of evolved from there. And MIFRE asked me to, and I think it was one of the first classes, more formal classes I did, Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, and kind of evolved from there. And people started asking me for help, in some of the things they do. One of the local unions needed help. A number of fire chief friends I helped gratis, who were good friends, to get them, right-sided on where they needed to go. You'll like this one. I even helped the town of Lexington, Virginia, when they had to deal with the press secretary, who's now the governor, for Trump. When she got turned down, remember the restaurant that turned her down?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the fire chief in Lexington's a friend of mine. He told the county manager, who knew me because he used to be up in College Park, and I consulted with them and worked with a lot of organizations. It's been some of my main work, for the last number of years, and did some of that work with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. But I also had people in the fire service who I really admired doing it. But one of them is my partner today, is Ron Sarnicki. I still use it. I'm going to use again this year an incident he had in about 97 or 98 where I was covering it. He had a bad one in Prince George's County where there was a cardiac arrest call that everything that could go wrong went wrong, starting with the 911 call and through the medics not having their life packs charged and other people not responding. It was a nightmare, and the guy died. And it just so happened that the lawyer for the wife was the daughter of a former top official in Prince George's County who was a good close friend of mine, and she called me. And anyway, so to make a long story short, Mark Brady, my current partner in what we do now, was the PIO, and I was one of those reporters who always said, this is going to sound crude, but I learned this statement from another veteran reporter. When you work a beat, don't stab people in the back, you stab them in the chest. You don't surprise them. If you got to work the beat, you want them to know what you're doing so they can be ready as much as possible. You got to deal with them every day. And, I don't want to, and so I've always felt that way. So one of the first calls I made was to Mark Brady. I said, Mark, I don't know if you know about this. And, yeah, I know about it. And thanks for the heads up. And so as I was finishing up with the family who didn't want to talk, and then talking to the lawyer who did talk, He said, when you finish up with them, come over and talk to Ron, the fire chief. And so I went over there, and I had no idea what Ron was going to say. But what I knew about Ron, who had become a good friend, was he was going to tell the truth, whatever it was. He may not tell me all the truth, but instead he told me all the truth. He said, this was a screw up from the beginning to the end, and it's my job to fix it. And he explained how he's going to fix it. And he's explained what the problems were, told me more than I knew already, which was not the way things were done in Washington. And I said, wow, this is interesting. And, many years later, I asked Ron why he did that. He said, because you're going to beat me up on the news for days on end and keep us in the news if we didn't come clean. He said the county attorney was apoplectic, that he was going to relay this information, not happy with him at all, but Ron knew that this was the way to handle things. And Ron was always pretty farsighted and visionary in that regard. I mean, he always had the ideas, look, whatever we do, we had to do in those days the Washington Post test, which is, what is this going to look like on the front page of the Washington Post? And Ron always felt that way. And candor and honesty were part of his hallmarks. So I knew that this was something I was learning from Ron. This was good. And actually, the first person I really saw do that in the Washington area, which again was not known for this, was the police chief, Charles, Chuck, what's his name? It'll come to me. Outsider police chief, came from Chicago, then went to Philly, and he's on CNN all the time, and I can't think of his last name right now. But he would go on council hearings and tell what was wrong with the department, because he was smart. He knew that's the only way I was going to get money, and no one ever did that. He would talk about their problems. When there were issues, he would explain them, and it was a smart way to do things. So fast forward 10 years from Ron doing that incident to an incident in Fairfax County toward the end of my career as a reporter. And the interim fire chief was a guy named Dave Rohr, who I knew, and they had a bad call. And this was a fire where they should have rescued this woman. They knew she was talking to 911 on the phone, and no one got up to the bathroom. And it started out as a kitchen fire, went up the stairwell, and she died of smoke inhalation. And I didn't know that when I went down there to cover the fire, but I started getting calls from sources saying, this was a bad one. We screwed up. We should have got to this woman. She was talking to 911 when we pulled up, and no one got to her for a long time. And so I knew something was wrong. So I called their PIO, who I wasn't as close to as Mark, and probably didn't appreciate it as much as Mark did, but he understood what I was doing, and he told Dave Rohr. So same thing happened. I finished up at the scene, talking to sources, tell me a lot. I go up to interview Dave Rohr, and I had, again, no idea what he was going to tell me. And Dave told me right away, we should have done a better job. We should have been with that woman. And again, it's my job to fix it. We already know what went wrong, and we're working to fix these problems. And the normal answer, even if you're going to, for most people, would be, it's under investigation. We'll do an investigation, and we may or may not tell you when it's done. That was the normal routine in Washington at that time. And I thought, this is something. And it's really funny that one of my early classes, I remember it was 2011. I remember it because while I was in Phoenix doing this class for the IFF and the IFC, a firefighter died in Baltimore County, which was a big story, and somebody called me. So it's 2011, I'm about a year into this, and Dave Rohr is in my class, along with the union president, who also talked to me that day, Mike Moeller, and who also, both said basically the same thing. And Mike, to his credit, went down when the story aired to sit with the crew that screwed up. Mike took the heat, and give him a lot of credit. They're both in the class, and they couldn't talk a lot at that point about it. They were limited because there was an open court case. They're being sued. This was, a number of years later. It's still going on. But they did say the same reason. There's no sense keeping this in the news for days on end. We knew we screwed up. There's no sense hiding it. The news wasn't going to get any better by us holding it. Again, as much as they may be learning from me, I was learning from them. So there are a lot of people in the fire service and emergency services who are really smart about this. Another one was, is it Ray Jones, I think his name is, Sacramento chief, how he handled cutbacks and having to do rotating closures of firehouses. Did it like nobody else did. Told people when they were going to be closed. Never said we can do more with less. We do less with less, right? These are all, and I use all of them as examples in my teaching, and I look for them. There are not as many as they should be. And then social media, when Ron started doing this, social media didn't exist. And it was more in its infancy when it happened in Fairfax County. So now today, it's a much different environment because, as a good friend of mine, well, not a good friend, but a friend of mine, Gerald Barron, said a number of years ago, your reputation can be now destroyed at the speed of light. So you have to be on top of these things. Sorry, am I just ranting, or does it make sense?
Oh, you're good. You're good. I think that kind of did. If you want to go to, we can skip 9, I think, and start with 10 and kind of the social media, and work it into kind of like, because we kind of talked about the trusted source of information.
Yeah. All right.
But kind of let's gear towards like social media, PIO. So like head down towards combating disinformation and the role of social media.
Yeah. All right, I'll work toward that for you. So,
yep.
To me, social media, for certainly public safety agencies and others, on a daily basis is a way to build reputation equity. If you're on there every day and build an audience, for once, you have a way to communicate directly with your stakeholders through social media, various forms of social media. If you establish a voice there on a daily basis, people tune in. They get the fact that they can get the news straight from you, and what has evolved from that is public information officers who are doing what I used to do as reporters. They're being reporters, not what I'd call journalists, not muckraking, not doing investigations and all that, but they are relayers of news and timely news, particularly breaking news. It dawned on me that, like my friend Mark Brady, one day I was looking at him riding around the Beltway during a snowstorm, taking pictures and video, and that's what they had me doing as a reporter. But he was doing it on social media and communicating with the people who lived in his community. And this was happening all over the country. The basic daily stuff builds reputation equity and builds that audience. But when you have either a reputation management issue or a critical incident, suddenly this can be your main lines of communication. And we see it with Twitter, now X, as that being the place to go during breaking news. It's become an issue now. We put all those eggs in that basket, and we're finding now having to diversify from that in a big way because a lot of people aren't on X anymore because of the politics of it. So that's an issue. And, I find myself even that if you put something out on just one platform, you really got to try to do it on multiple platforms. So I tell people, and I will take credit for this line, become the voice of the emergency. This, again, something I learned from the fire service. In that 2011 class I was talking about in Phoenix, they had just gone through, I think, months earlier, or maybe the year away, I don't know the timeline, where outside of, where was Gabby Giffords shot?
Flagstaff?
Where was it?
Was it Tempe or Flagstaff, I thought?
No, it wasn't Flagstaff. It was in, it'll come to me. Well, we'll look that up. Anyway, one of the women in the class was a deputy chief with that department. It was Northwest Fire District. And where is it? Tucson. Is it? Yeah, Tucson, outside of Tucson. I think I'm right. And
yeah, I just looked it up, Tucson.
Yeah, right. So in that shopping center. So they had been using social media every day. And she said to me, when this happened, We did, nobody was available, nobody did social media, and we caught hell for it. I said, this is interesting. So I use that as an example. You're building this audience on a daily basis. You're building reputation equity. You're telling people what you do. You're getting your videos out. You're getting your information out. You're doing all that. But if you're not there for the big one, not there to hold the public's hand, you're letting them down. And this was an important lesson. And so it's really, really key to become the voice of the emergency early on. And there's so many voices out there. If you've ever watched what some people call the waterfall on Twitter, if you put in a search term, I did it years ago with the Columbia Mall shooting in Maryland, and just put in Columbia Mall shooting, and to see how many voices are out there speaking on Twitter, and it just rolls through, And how do you get through that? In that day, just by chance, their police department did. And they became the voice of the emergency. They got on there early. They gave confirmed information out very quickly. It shoots down rumors. It takes control of the situation. People tend to give them more regard if they're being candid and timely than taking somebody else who may try to become the voice of the emergency. So I think that's one of the most effective ways to do it, is to get out there early. The ones that have lost on it, we had a situation here with 2 metro trains colliding and killing 10 people in the afternoon rush hour. And the one-man shop of the DC Fire PIO was doing a good job at that time. This is late 2008. He was on social media. He was doing interviews early on with TV and radio, and suddenly he was gone. He wasn't there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And what had happened? The mayor shut him down. They gave word to the fire department, no one's to talk about this till I get out there and hold a press conference. Completely shut down all lines of communications. And here you have the afternoon rush hour, and people need information. Much of Metro was being affected by this, even though it was on other lines. It was all backing up, and people were wondering, what's going on? Was my family, is my relative on the train? So there was no information suddenly. There was for early on in this emergency for an hour and a half, and that became a big issue. I wrote about it. The Post wrote about it. They lied about it and denied that it happened in the beginning, and then a year or so later, Dennis Rubin came out and admitted that's exactly what happened. So he was the chief of DC Fire at that time when it happened, and called me out on the radio, but that's another story. Anyway, it's important to be there. You are a voice during that emergency, the experts. And we do a class called Tell Your Own Story. And, and this is your opportunity to tell your story. I think of other times and other reasons to be able to be out there is, sadly, my former job in the news media, they became not as diligent as they used to be, particularly in trying to compete with social media. We saw a number of instances where bad information went on CNN, Fox News, and other, particularly the cable news channels, because they rushed things on. In the Boston bombing, they rushed on that there was an arrest. Arrest hadn't happened. It wasn't going to happen for another day or so. There was a whole big thing where they tried to say that there was an incident where shots were fired when President Obama was at the Pentagon, and on a 9/11 anniversary. Didn't happen. It was a drill. And it was important to have the voice of the experts, so to speak, in public safety to get the word out. When John King mistakenly put on there was an arrest in the Boston bombing, I think he was the deputy chief of Boston police, put out immediately, that's not the case. And it shut that rumor down. So those things are important. And now even more so because there's so much misinformation, disinformation, malinformation being put out there that you've got to handle that too. in the most recent case with the wildfires in Los Angeles, I was watching PIOs for a number of departments having to answer to these rumors and say, no, that didn't happen this way. It happened this way. Here are the facts. They have to correct that. And they were doing a good job of being the voice of the emergency and finding it even more difficult because of the people who are putting out the misinformation, and often for political purposes.
Political monetary. That's what I've seen a lot of. Is there is a market for misinformation if it tilts the way people want, the preconceived notions to tilt, and the grift has become massive.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And you asked what the critical first steps are for when a crisis emerges. It's a really good question. And first thing is confirm what's happening. And there's a balance between speed and accuracy. And there was always a time in the news business that, we have to dot the I's, cross the T's, and in those putting out public information. We type up this press release and all that. You have to give it your best effort now. A breaking news story, an evolving news story, things are going to change. You may have early information that there's 6 people dead, and it turns out to be there 5 or 7. It's not the worst mistake you will make. The worst mistake I think you'll make in there is not being there for the people who want to know what's happening. You can correct that information immediately because you still have the way to correct it, the same social media to correct it. And people are always scared of that. Do your best to confirm, and don't be reckless, but confirm what is known. And what I teach people, because it's something I learned from somebody long ago in the news business, having watched them on TV, and that was one of the anchors who was not well known publicly outside of New York during the John F. Kennedy assassination. I went back and watched him, and his daughter. I ended up as a reporter in Washington. My wife worked with him as a friend of ours, a guy named Bill Ryan. He put things very early on. This was on NBC, not CBS, with Walter Cronkite. He put it on what we know and what we don't know at this point. What we know is important. These are the things you've confirmed and that you can put out immediately on social media. What we don't know solves another problem. People have lots of questions that they're asking. And if you're ignoring those questions, people are saying, why aren't they answering my question? But if you say, we know you're probably interested in this, but we don't yet know that. We're still trying to confirm the numbers injured, or who is injured, or whatever it is, or the cause of this incident. So what I think a good way to do this is what we know and what we don't know. And there are people teaching, and I do to a certain extent, if you're a public information officer, put yourself in the realm of being a reporter. Maybe put your operation in the mode of being a newsroom during breaking news. And if you go look at how they operate, good ones operate, that's a good model to run. And you have different standards and different things you're after, but still it's about information and getting it out that's accurate. And there's still too much withholding, I think, of early information for stupid reasons. And I'm a little harsh with stupid, but reasons that really don't make sense. I was a little critical most recently of the mid-air crash in Washington, when the mayor of Washington, in her first briefing hours after it happened, thought it took a little long, that she didn't acknowledge that we've brought bodies ashore, and that we're still doing that. And for 2 reasons. It left hope that they were going to find survivors, which was very unlikely, and they knew that. And it's confirmed information. At that point, they had brought 30 bodies ashore. And maybe they didn't want to give an exact number, but just needed to acknowledge this is, even though we're calling it still a rescue operation because of the timeline and because it's a cold water rescue, it was unlikely, and it still let people know that we're only taking in dead people. I thought that was wrong, and I think that was something that could be confirmed. I like the model that the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, uses. They tell you what is confirmed information. They don't put an opinion out on it. But if they've got something that's clearly confirmed, and they'll do more, they'll dot the I's and cross the T's on it. If they know that the air traffic controller said this and the pilot said this, they're going to report it. They don't see a reason to withhold it. They're very good about that. And I think the public appreciates that, and it gives them confidence. And it really reinforces to people that you are the expert and you really know something. Because if get out there and don't tell people anything. You waste their time. Um, let's see. You know, one of the, I'm looking at question 4 here on under crisis communications.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a good one too. In that many years ago, before there was social media, the social media solved a really important problem for public information officers, and that is, I'd go to these meetings with public information officers. We had for decades here, and I ran it for a number of years. We had a group of every month where public information officers and reporters and assignment editors and other news people would meet once a month to discuss issues. And the issue that was never solvable is every time somebody hears something on the scanner, you call the PIO, and we get calls from multiple people, and we can't handle it. We talked about setting up our own personal teletype, pagers, anything that we could do to get the information out to stop these calls. And then social media came along and pretty much solved it. Now, it took some time for people to know they could trust it, but once the news media learned they could trust it, this freed up the public information officer. They could tweet out confirmed information that went to every newsroom. They took this as gospel. And at the same time, the public information officer is tweeting it out to their audience that's following them, that's their stakeholders who may be watching it. And interacting with them in the early stages, you interact with them through social media, then I think, you need to, as soon as possible, have a press conference and let them ask questions. Drives me up a wall like they did at the plane crash in Toronto, where the president of the airport came out for 3 minutes and 10 seconds and then refused to answer questions. Wrong. I'm sorry. You called it a press conference for a reason. You could have done the same thing on Twitter and not showed up. You just wanted to be on TV, and thank everybody. And don't get me started, because it's not related to what you're doing, on thanking everybody at a press conference.
Where they turn and acknowledge every uniformed
and then the next person gets up and says the thing. And my line is, look, the public expects you to work together, play together well in the sandbox. It's when you don't, it becomes news.
There was when the fifth small fire in LA happened, but it was not in LA County. It was in can't remember. It was just across the border, and you had 2 national parks, Cal Fire, LA County Fire, LA City Fire, whatever county it was in, and then for some reason there were federal law enforcement there too, and the sheriff got up there. You could tell he had no clue what was actually going on, and he just thanked every agency by name. And it took him 7 minutes to actually get to, hey, we're evacuating 50,000 people, and one of them's a prison, by the way. It's always comical to me.
Yeah.
And everybody up there, of course, has more stars than the next guy. That was always funny.
And they bury the lead. When the bridge collapsed in Baltimore, when the Key Bridge collapsed, I was listening to a press conference a day, or it might have been the day after, and the governor, who's a good guy, Wes Moore, was out there. And they held the press conference, and afterwards they're asking questions, and somebody asked something. And the governor just threw off as an aside, the Maryland Transportation Department police saved lives because they blocked the bridge, which I already had assumed they had. I could see from some stuff that I knew, but I wasn't sure. But he buried the lead, just threw it off as an aside, and spent too much time thanking people at the top and all this other stuff. That should have been the first information out. They saved lives that day by blocking the highway and keeping the public out.
I mean, and to me, that's so critical, because it actually gave information that wasn't available before. That the ship knew something was wrong, tried to get a hold of people, and there was enough time in there for at least critical minute, or I think it was 4 to 6 minutes.
Yeah,
that's critical because the theories of what it could have been at that point, it ranged from terrorism attack to the ship.
Absolutely.
But having that information, I'm so people on the ship know what was going on. They had time to communicate it, and people on shore had at least a chance to initially react, because it probably saves a lot of lives, I would imagine, blocking the bridge.
Yeah, and I was like, where was the meeting beforehand to say we need to get this out at top? Where was somebody advising? I don't know. I don't know who his press person was at the time, but somebody's like, come on. I know they're tired. They hadn't slept much, but yeah, that's the news, and that's the thing. Um, managing the news when you hold these press conferences, put the news up front, save the thanks for later as much as possible. Try to keep the politicians under control. Don't do what they did in Louisiana and New Orleans. You saw that one, I assume.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, then the contrast was Las Vegas after that, which was great. But but you knew that was going to be a mess in Los Angeles when you looked at them setting up on the live feed. There were more people, I think, behind the podium than were on the other side on the press. And I said, oh, this isn't going to be good, and it was just awful. But the other thing is, when you have updates, don't tell the story chronologically again. This is how news people think. Don't bury the lead, put it at the top. Put the new information at the top. And if the new information is important enough that something the public needs to know, you don't need to have a press conference for it. That's what your social media is for. Get it out there. Like the fact is, hey, this isn't anthrax in 1997, but join us at the press conference. We didn't have social media then, but that would be a way to do it. Get the word out, or then they could have put a press release out quickly and said, hey, it's not anthrax. We'll tell you what it was, blah, 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 But go ahead.
The one thing that does concern me, and we could talk about getting it out there on social media, and the thing I did notice is, like when I go on Twitter now, it used to be my feed was filled with the people I followed, and then obvious things about Virginia Tech sports, firefighting, emergency management, things that I was genuinely interested in, and then obviously news, which kind of a little bit of politics in there, some things like that. But even now, you can go into the search algorithm and search, LA fire, like when they arrested the two the guy and the girl out of Oregon who had the fire truck and were faking to get in.
Right.
It's hard to find, honestly. Now the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter are not doing favors.
Oh no, it's awful.
And it's getting harder to find. Not necessarily just real information, just information about it, because the hashtags are taken over by grifters and I hate to say porn stars that are trying to get their because a dollar out of 50 million people is still $50 million. It kills me trying to weed through that to find legitimate information from the actual sources, and the news places don't do themselves favors now. Here in Jacksonville, we don't have a St. Augustine newspaper anymore. They just take stories written by the Jacksonville paper that have an interest in their area, rebrand them as St. Augustine News, and put it out on their website or social media. So you actually get, if you follow the Florida Times Union and the St. Augustine Record, the exact same tweet, the exact
I've seen that
story,
and
it's killer because you don't get the in-depth reporting, but you're also, it's not just in-depth reporting. You're not getting legitimate. You can't find the legitimate information.
And that speaks to why the PIO is crucial. We saw it one time. I bet this is again going back to 2011. I first saw signs of this when we had a little wildfire. It was pretty big for this area, one of the largest fire responses in Maryland history. In Prince George's County, they had two fronts where windy January day, I think it was, and it dry, and they had to shut down 95, and for this area it was pretty giant. I think every county sent something to Prince George's County. But Mark Brady was the sole public information officer. But it was not just trying to figure out where to be for him. Didn't have any help there. On a Saturday, there weren't people updating the websites on a lot of these TV stations, doing the social media, all the things. So it was really up to him to be the voice. And it was difficult. And he found it a big challenge. So now it's so much worse because we have fewer news voices out there and, staff cuts, and more important for these public information officers to be out there and telling their story as best they can, because they may be the only ones doing it. And in another, you say 5 to 10 years, they may be the only ones the way the news business is going. I hope not. but it's pretty sad. And there's such these news deserts are getting larger and larger that you're talking about. And
It does. In-depth reporting, the long form reporting,
yep,
it's unfortunately going away, and it scares me, not just as a news consumer, but public safety wise. Like, how do you hold accountable budget cuts when legitimately needed? I was on the job for the 2009 recession, and
right,
we took a pay cut in order to keep a fourth person riding the engine
right,
originally.
right, right. Yep,
And
no,
then
go
six
ahead.
months later, they cut the fourth person on the engine.
Yep,
So we took a pay cut. You cut a person on the engine later. Where is the local media covering it? And
yeah.
it's not there. And
Oh,
it's
what I've done with DC 911 in 2019. I reported on a couple deaths. There were two deaths, and in early 2020, I've been reporting on all this, and it was in my infancy of really getting into this. One of my friends at the Washington Post took me to lunch, said, "I want to cover this story," and I said, "I'll help you. I don't want to cover this. I don't want to be writing this stuff. I'll open up what I've got so far to you." So he took me to lunch on Jeff Bezos' account, and um, I spent 2.5 hours with him. Good reporter, known him for many years. He couldn't sell the story. Could not get it past the editors. They weren't interested in this news. And within 2 years, 3 years, I have documented 14 deaths. Can't say caused by them, but were connected to mistakes at 911. And how could the Washington Post not be interested in that story? Excuse me. You know, it just boggled my mind. And I talked to other reporters after him who every once in a while they'd call and be interested because they'd see my stuff. And it took 4 or 5 years to get the Post the least bit interested in the story. And I'm like, what is going on? And it's very sad. I mean, I had no intention of doing what I call advocacy journalism on this, and I just because I could pitch the stories to anyone else, just like you're talking about. What else? Give me some more questions. What else?
um. Let's skip the jump ahead because I think I'm getting over my time limit. Um, where do you see the role of PIO in the next? So we're going to look ahead, number 12. What do you see as the next challenges and roles for PIOs next 5 to 10 years?
I think they're going to be more valuable because there's going to be less news and less resources for the news industry. And the more that they can tell their story, particularly these critical incidents, the better they're going to be. Um, there may not be the news as we know it somewhere down the road. It's certainly going to be much, much fewer um, news to cover. Now, when the big incident occurs, there'll be a hell of a lot of news. When you got the really big one, there's a line that I came up with. I think it's that I tell in my classes. You have to be ready for this because of our instant communications, the eyes of the world can be on you instantly, in a matter of seconds when it hits the fan in your community. No matter how big or small your community is. So
Yep.
everybody needs to be ready to the fact that the spotlight is going to be on you and it's going to be around the world. And that's why it's so key for public safety agencies to somehow find a way to have a public information officer and someone who knows how to do this and know how to scale it up when you get the big incident. I know how hard it is in a small rural area that doesn't have a lot of resources. I know how it is in some big cities when their budgets have been cut, but it's crucial. They had an incident a number of years ago in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where there was a natural gas explosion. Uh, Killed a couple people. It was right outside a nursing home. I don't think anybody in the nursing home died, but some gas workers were killed. It was a loud boom in that community on a Sunday night, about 10 o'clock. And, 10 o'clock on Sunday night, people hear this explosion. What are they going to be thinking? It's terrorism, right? That's what the first thing that's going to go through their mind. And, after 9/11, there was nobody to tell them what it was. There was a news out there. I followed that incident, but it was an interesting thing that the fire chief said. They had a tough time shutting the gas off, and he told the reporter, the reporter went to the mayor, and the mayor said, "You need to talk to the fire chief." The fire chief said, "Look, I got to deal with this gas here. That's my job." And I'm thinking, well, there's another job. There's another conflagration brewing, and that's in your community because they don't know what's going on. So it needs to be somebody's job to do this. And I think that we've got to be better at it than ever. We've got to figure out ways. If Twitter's not going to be the way for breaking news, we may have to find out ways to instantly do it on multiple platforms. What needs to be done? Maybe find the next Twitter that loses some of the political baggage, if that's possible. We created a monster in a sense. And I'm to blame as much as anybody else. And everybody says it's still the one place to go for breaking news as much as any, but you bring up some clear problems with it. So we've got to figure that out. What are our communication tools? What will be the new communication tools? How do we adapt them to getting our messages out? And they're important messages, and we have to find ways to get them out.
And then I think, time to finish it up, if you could just give one or two pieces of advice or knowledge, not necessarily advice, not necessarily, but like something to hold on to for someone looking to get in, not just PIO for public safety, but any kind of crisis PIO, so crisis manager or somebody working for even a private company. What would be, I guess, the biggest kernels to take into their new role?
If you're in public safety, you've learned early on that it's not your emergency to take out the emotion of what you're doing. And and if you're particularly a firefighter, you learn, and EMS, you learn what size up's about. How do we size up a breaking situation? And I think firefighters, EMS, are uniquely qualified, and to a certain extent police, uniquely qualified to be able to do that already, have that training. Get that other training that goes with it. Because on the reverse side, as a reporter, I often, when I showed up at a breaking news, and I covered a hell of a lot of breaking news, I would use my skills in the fire department to size up the situation. What are the priorities here? What's the importance? What needs to be handled now? What needs to be handled later? Where's this fire going? Where's this news story going? There were a lot of parallels that I used personally. Do the reverse. What are the skills that may not still be there in the news business that you can adapt as your role as a public safety PIO? And something else we failed to mention, we talked about the misinformation. And one of the things, and I'm not the only one to teach this, is you've got a big critical incident. You need to monitor social media. Not necessarily you as the PIO. It can be done off-site. You need to know, as Eric Scott is doing in LA, what those rumors are, which ones need to be addressed, which ones need to be addressed immediately, which ones can wait, which ones, the immediate ones are the ones that are going to have potential to impact public safety. The other ones that are just maybe more reputation management might be able to wait a little bit, but there needs to be surveillance of social media, and I don't mean that in a sinister way, so you know what's going on. And there's a lot of things to be gained with it. In a wildfire situation, a tornado, hurricane, the social media surveillance will not only tell you what you need to know from a public information standpoint, it's also going to tell you what you need to know where there are hot spots you may not know about because communication lines may be down.
I think that's good.
I just forgot that. And did we cover that enough, the incident in LA, or is there anything more?
Well, no, for that, I just need to, that's on my end. They want us to have one incident that basically to talk about and basically explain. So like all of research that I've done talking to you, how does that impact into one incident type of thing? Does that make sense?
Right. I think that's a real good one. Something to
I'll reach out to him.
Yeah. So something to keep in mind on that, and I don't remember which one it was. It was further north in California, if I remember. They had a California wildfire where this guy who used to be a firefighter became the voice of the emergency. He kind of took over. People were following him. He didn't do a bad job. I wish I could remember who he was. I don't know if I wrote about that or not. I'll have to look it up. But a lot of people in that community turned to him for information. I don't know. I can't pinpoint if they were doing a bad job or he just flooded the zone with what he did and was there at times the others weren't there. But that was kind of interesting, and it may play in a little historical perspective. That might have been 10 years ago, but it kind of evolves into, he happened to be a good one, but there are a lot of ones, a lot of who have a different, either more sinister or more political, who might be doing that.
Yeah, there was a lot going on with the. I know. Did you see the statement that Oregon fire marshals had to put out about the trucks that were doing mutual aid
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
weren't being
That's
turned
another
away?
one.
It had to be an official like statement, and just reading the comments of people who were like, "Well, you're lying." It's like what the fact that the fire marshals in Oregon have to go out of their way to write up an official statement, and then you're still it blows my mind.
Oh, and you should have seen and who was believing it more than anybody? Firefighters.
Oh my god. So I moderate on Reddit, the firefighter subreddit. I don't know if you use Reddit or not, or go on there. But it just astounding. Um, those two fires, obviously, because it's LA, get a lot of coverage. So how many non-firefighters came into our sub and would post these just outrageous things? And 90% of the comments were like, "This is, you're an idiot. How can you even think this? This is not how it works." But 10% of our people who we know are firefighters because they were there on the sub before are just like, "Oh, that kind of makes sense." And I'm like, no, it doesn't at all. What are you talking about? How that even it killed me to see guys on the job falling for this stuff. And something that I read recently, and it kind of resounds with both him, but as I'm starting to realize more and more people that people in things you don't understand, someone who seems smart, has some power, talk about things you don't understand, you believe them until they talk about something and
Right.
then you realize that guy's just a giant idiot. And they're talking about Elon Musk because he doesn't understand a lot of the stuff that he pretends to. It seems like he
Oh
just
yeah.
goes off
Oh yeah. Yeah.
because we're like, oh, well, he did this stuff then, and then you get like now he's talking about NASA International Space Station, and the actual astronauts are like, no, that's not how it works. Where he starts talking about budget cuts and public safety, and I'm like, that's not how it works. And it just astounds me that there's people like, oh yeah, okay, well he's a smart guy, he knows about this stuff, but you're in this field, you know what's not true. Well, he just might have made a mistake. How many mistakes do these people have to make before we realize they don't know what they're talking about?
Uh-oh. Hold on a second. Did my recording stop? Oh no, it did. Okay. Scared me for a second. No, it was there. It's there. All right. Hold on a second. Um, no, you're absolutely right. I just had a moment of panic. Sorry, but it did not.
Okay.
I don't know why I thought something came up, but no, I have unlimited on this, so not unlimited, but certainly it doesn't kind of shut out early. That's why it surprised me. I thought I saw a message. I read it wrong. No, that's interesting. And no, I'm not really. I look at Reddit occasionally. I do searches and all that. I never really got into it, and because I didn't understand it, and probably should understand some things better. And
That's
and
that's
I'm
where I was
old,
for a
and
long
I'm
time.
old.
That's where I was for a long time, and then as I saw Twitter head take a downward turn, I looked for other sources, and mostly it was just to be like, oh, I need some local information, and so I followed my local, information, and branched out from there. But like any social media nowadays, you have to know what you're looking for and weed out the crap to find legitimate things.
Right.
Unfortunately, and
Uh,
that's
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Um, Two things. One,
yes,
by the
sir.
way, in your times in Virginia, anyway, did you ever run into a guy named Lee Moffat? Do you know that name?
That
He used
sounds
to.
really familiar.
He was one of the medics on Pegasus out of Charlottesville for many years, and an old friend of mine. We met through another mutual friend, and we've stayed in touch. He's no longer there, and he's also a nurse and a singer, and he'd been all around Virginia. I didn't know where, and mostly from Harrisonburg originally, but and his brother's name Tom was in the fire service in Virginia somewhere.
The people I read, and you would know some of them. The two guys in Roanoke who used to have the websites.
Rhett and Willie.
Yes. So Rhett, so he started off at the same department or same station that I was at in Chesterfield.
Yeah,
So
I
I
hear
had,
from Brett. He's a battalion chief now.
yeah, I saw that. And the other guy's retired, right?